So my wife Caitlin and I, we moved to Chicago in 2015. For those who don't know, we're not originally from this area. We're actually from Ohio. But this is a huge decision for us, and we had been talking about living somewhere different for off and on for about 40 years. During this time, we were still processing what we should do. I was just given the opportunity at the church I was serving at that time in Ohio, or in the Columbus area, to go full-time, which was a huge blessing for us. At that moment, it seemed like that we were going to be staying in Ohio for the foreseeable future. For the first time in our marriage, Caitlin and I both had full-time jobs, and neither of us had to work two different jobs. And we were also working at becoming foster parents at the time as well. We were ready to be certified and do that there in Ohio. Everything seemed to be going perfectly fine, perfectly well. However, there was still the sense that we wanted to still follow where God wanted us to go. We wanted to live in this new place and do something different and have a little adventure. We felt comfortable in Ohio because we'd always lived there in that area. But Caitlin and I have never tried to do things just because we feel comfortable. We wanted to go where we felt God was leading us at the time. And Caitlin had this dream. She was working for a marketing firm at the time, and she always had this dream of doing marketing, but doing it for a nonprofit. And so we set a goal that in 3 months that she would look for a job, and if she didn't find a job in 3 months, that we would stay in Ohio. So 2 months went by, and she didn't hear anything. And then she heard back from a job in the Chicagoland area, and then that began our adventure to Chicago. And just to be clear, moving from Ohio to Chicago is not the greatest financial decision that we've ever made. It's significantly more expensive to live here, but that's not why we made the decision. We both had good jobs, and by moving, she was moving for her job, but I had to resign from the position at the church I was at. I was also working full-time at the church, but also part-time, as some of you may know, at Starbucks. And so we moved knowing that I would go full-time there, but the pay there is slightly different as a barista. And in the end, we decided to take this jump. We moved from Columbus to the Chicago area, even though people ask the question, "Are you sure?" And if people have asked you that question, what that really means is we think this is a really bad idea. Right. It also wasn't great for me because I had to leave, again, my position at the church I was at, and I was going to at least be out of ministry for a period of time. We didn't know how long that would be. The move itself just really didn't make a lot of sense, but we decided to do it because we believed that God was leading us in this direction, and that we had hope that even though it didn't fully even make sense to us, didn't fully make sense to the people around us, that God was leading us and that everything would be okay. Sometimes hope comes in the most unlikely of places. People may not understand why you're doing the thing you're doing. They may even try to tell you why that is the wrong decision. But something deep inside you says, there's hope here. These are wonderful people, and they may even have a list of reasons they give you about why you shouldn't do that thing. And that list may even make sense to you and to them and everyone else around you and have some validity to that. But there's a deep sense in us that says, take the leap, there's hope here. Sometimes having hope is doing the thing that doesn't completely make sense in the moment. So what do we do when we feel called to the thing we want to do, we need to do, whatever it is for you, but it doesn't quite make sense? As you heard read so beautifully this morning from Rob, Jeremiah has a few things to say to us about finding hope and doing things that on the surface don't fully make sense. So we've been learning over the past 2 weeks, and Pastor James has been talking to us about the life of Jeremiah, the prophet, and he came and brought a lot of difficult news, and there's a lot of difficult experiences that he had, and just different things of going through the pit and all those different things that he went through. But what Jeremiah is saying is that they're going to be overthrown by the Babylonians and that they're going to destroy their land. It's really not the best news and not the job I would want to have, to go and tell people all these negative things that are going to happen. In the passage we read today, frankly, at first glance, as I was reading, preparing for this, I'm like, why are we reading about a field and Jeremiah's cousin, and that's nice that he wants him to buy this thing? Why are we reading about a field? What is happening here? So everything that Jeremiah has been saying, the negative things, all the bad things that he says is going to happen, has been starting to happen. So the Babylonians are taking over, they're destroying everything. And what do people do when that happens? They leave. They don't want to be in the area. They don't want to be overthrown. They're going to become Babylonian slaves and led into exile and all those other things. So they start to leave. And this is the point at which Jeremiah's cousin comes to him and says, you want to buy this piece of land and stay here. So obviously, people around him think that is not a good decision. It doesn't make any sense to buy this field because people are planning to escape. But Jeremiah is saying, I'm not leaving. Plus, the Babylonians are going to destroy this land that he is being offered to purchase. On the outside, this looks like a really bad decision. And this wasn't just a bad decision between Jeremiah and his cousin, and they're just talking amongst themselves and no one else knows about it. But this would have been a very public decision that everyone in the community, everyone in the area would have known about. When you bought a piece of land or a field or anything like that in the ancient world, you would do 4 things. You would sign the deed, which is nice and fine, but you would do that amongst witnesses. So there are other people there seeing you buy and purchase this land. Then you would count that money, and they kind of talked about in the passage about weighing that out. But that would, again, be in front of people, be in front of witnesses. And lastly, you would register the purchase publicly. And I say all this to say this isn't like an under the table and no one really knows about that Jeremiah and his cousin are doing this type of thing. Everyone would have known that Jeremiah has bought this field and is intending to stay. And why is this important? Why are we reading about this today? Jeremiah is investing in hope. At the time when everyone's packing up and Jeremiah is saying hope is coming. In a season when people are fleeing, leaving their homes, and abandoning everything, God says this place will again thrive. This field is a visible sign of hope, not only for Jeremiah, but for the people of Israel. Then we see at the end of chapter 32 that hope is coming. Again, it was read so beautifully this morning, but I just want to read again for us the signs of hope that Jeremiah talks about. So starting in verse 36, it says, "Now I want to say something more about this city. You have been saying, it will fall to the king of Babylon through war, famine, disease. But this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I will certainly bring back my people again from all the countries where I will scatter from them in my fury. I will bring them back to this very city and let them live in peace and safety. They will be my people, I will be their God, and I will give them one heart and one purpose to worship me forever, for their own good and for the good of all their descendants. And I will make them an everlasting covenant with them, and I will never stop doing good for them. I will put a desire in their hearts to worship me, and they will never leave me, and I will find joy doing good for them, and will faithfully and wholeheartedly replant them in this land." So for Jeremiah, the story doesn't end in uncertainty and chaos and pain. God shows Jeremiah that there will be hope. God says hope is coming. Much like Jeremiah's story, you may be in the midst of a painful or difficult situation. Maybe you think that there's no way to find hope. But like Jeremiah's story, where you are now is not the end, and your story keeps going, and you too can invest in hope like Jeremiah. There's room for hope, restoration, and new life within your story because your story isn't over. You may feel similar to Jeremiah, and there hasn't been much to celebrate recently, but maybe all you need is to find and invest in just a little hope. Hope is hard because sometimes hope doesn't make sense. I don't think Jeremiah thought he would find hope as he purchases this field, but that's exactly where this hope began. Sometimes hope is in the most unlikely of places. It may not make sense to invest in hope, especially as we talk about failures and times of pain and times of difficulty. But sometimes the very thing God is calling us to do, calling you and he's calling me, is a thing that doesn't quite make sense in the moment. So how can you invest in hope, in restoration, and new life? It can be easy to see all the pain and difficulty, but this is just a small part of the story. Like Jeremiah's story, hope and healing come. You can view God as angry and vindictive because there are scriptures that seem to point to that kind of God. But at the end of the story, we see a God of hope. Oh, he's always restoring. God's always creating new life, and God's always rewriting your story. Jeremiah's story doesn't end in pain. His story continues, and there's hope in the end. Your story continues, and my story continues. The good news is there is hope because God is with us. Knowing that our stories continue, we must invest in hope like Jeremiah. Investing in hope might be worshiping God and coming to church even when it's difficult to do so. It might be serving others when we just frankly don't feel like it. It might be choosing to see what we have even when we're in great need of something. It might be living like you know things are going to turn around. It might be forgiving others when they have hurt you. It might be continuing to engage in our community and our world even when people say you shouldn't do that. There's no point to that. And it might simply just mean coming back to God in whatever capacity that looks like for you. God created you and he loves you. This God of hope is with you through these difficult moments, walking right beside you. God is wanting to reveal to you all the ways that you can find hope today. Sometimes this hope is in the most unlikely of places. Sometimes hope begins when you buy a field, and through buying a field, you're able to see there was hope there the whole time because God was with you the whole time, here, now, today. We've seen through this series and today that we're all in this thing together. We've all experienced on a certain level pain or difficulty or failure. It's not all the same, but we've all had that similar experience of some type of failure or pain or things didn't work out the way we thought they would. Some of us may be in the midst of that right now. When Caitlin and I moved here, I honestly, as we moved here and we were here for a while, I didn't know if I would be in ministry again or be able to be a pastor again because it was very hard to find that. And I just didn't know. And that was really difficult for me because that's something I had always felt called to do and wanted to do. And then there was a moment where I resigned myself just to be a manager at a Starbucks. And as they say in Starbucks world, just sling those lattes. And for a while, that is what I did. But there was always something calling me back and to not give up this call. My buying the field moment was actually on my first visit to Garrett Evangelical Seminary when I was still knew nothing about Kingswood United Methodist Church, and I was still working in my job at Starbucks, and I did not love it. And Caitlin and I would have conversations, and she's like, well, why don't you try to go back to school and maybe do something like that, at least start looking at that. And I was like, I don't know. And so, of course, the next day, she just hopped online and looked at all these schools, and she found Garrett Evangelical Seminary. And so she's like, just go and just look at it. So I just I called them and set up a visit. And I walked in there, and I was meeting with the recruiter, and she's telling me about the school and all these different things and asking me all these questions. And I get a call from the store, which I always hate. And it was this person that worked for me that had food poisoning for the 5th time in 6 months. So I don't really think it was food poisoning. But either way, she was calling off and not coming into work. And so the recruiter could tell that I was overly stressed. And she was like, maybe you should look at our job board. And so I did that, and that is actually where I found Kingswood Church. And I never thought I would find hope on a visit to a school that, frankly, I didn't have time to even go to, and I was just going because my wife said that's probably a good idea, so I was just, that's great, I will do that. Because, frankly, my schedule was too crazy, I couldn't do it. And I didn't even know that school existed. I knew about Northwestern. I had no idea about Garrett Evangelical Seminary. My story isn't over, and your story isn't over. Our stories aren't over. Our stories are still being written. Because of this, we can invest in hope. We can lean into God. And there is hope because God is with you and with me. You don't need to fix everything today. We can't fix everything today. But what we can do is just take one step toward the God who loves you. However you do that, however that best fits with your situation and your circumstance, just take one step. You don't have to take from A to Z, just A to B. And the God of hope will be there. He's with you now, and he's with you today. My prayer today is that it can be a buying the field type of moment for you. You'll look back and say, today was the day that I started or I continued to invest and find hope. Today was the day I decided to look for God, and in looking for God each day, I was able to invest and find hope. Let us all invest in hope. Let us all see the ways that God is replanting us in God's love, God's care, God's hope, and God's peace. Amen. Would you hold out your hands in a blessing? Kingswood Church, as we go from this place, may we remember we don't have to take step from A to Z or even A to C, but what's one step that we all can take to go from A to B, to continue to invest in hope, to find hope, and to know that God is with us. Amen. Would you continue to stand for our closing song?